Welcome back to the Female Dating Strategy, the meanest female-only podcast on the internet. I am your host, Diana.
And I'm Rose. And before we get into our topic today, Diana, you know what? I didn't bring this up in the pre-show, but I want to bring up to you in real time how fucking psyched I've been about all the guests we've had so far this year. Can you believe it?
I know. It's been so great having so many of these guests. I've just been really excited to talk to all of them.
They're such wonderful conversationalists. And even more important than that, like, they're so knowledgeable and they back it up with such wonderful data. Like, to me, it almost feels like we're getting these master classes from professors. You know, we literally did with Jane Ward and Dr. Gail Dines.
I think it's so important to just have perspective in general and just to be able to talk to other women who've been in this field for years, who've been studying a lot of the things that we talk about in the forum and the podcast in general, I think is just essential. I mean, you know, a lot of the pushback we get from the manosphere in general is that this is an echo chamber. And I think that what we've tried to prove even with the guests is there's a variety of people who agree with our teachings, who've had a lifetime of experience, who can share that experience with us. Like, I think that there's a systematic disregard for older women in dating in general, right? Because it's like these people know game and they know how the male mind operates. Like, they've dealt with enough men and they've seen every version of man you can imagine in times that were probably way more punitive than the ones that we live in now. And if they're saying the exact same things we're saying, that just means things haven't changed that much.
Exactly. Echo chamber. That's a rich accusation coming from that world.
I know.
Like, okay, guys, sure. Insert the gif of Jennifer Lawrence, like with her thumbs up, you know, giving this sort of like derisive smile. Like, sure, guys, sure. But it's so interesting because like Diana and I, when we first started out as the hosts, you know, we were trying to get our sea legs under us and we were trying to get, you know, a flow going and establish our own dialogue. And I think we've done a pretty good job of it, Diana. If I want to grade us, I definitely give us like at least a B+.
Yeah, but I will say I have missed it just being the two of us. It's been nice to have everyone, but I have looked forward to just having a you and I conversation.
We've got a little spoiled and I'm not sad about it.
Yeah.
What was interesting was like, okay, so last year was where we first got established. And then like just a few months ago, we were like, listen, we said when we started that we wanted to get some of these guests back on, like Lundy, Gail. They've always had great success when they've appeared on FDS. They've said before that they're willing to appear again, like, let's give it a try, but also let's throw out some lures and see who else we can get. And I still am like in awe of how we've hardly gotten any no's. Almost every 1 to a 1 has been a yes, and an enthusiastic yes.
Yeah. That was really surprising to me too, because when we decided to do this, we were like, let's just send out as many emails as possible, because obviously there'll be a few of them that say no. And so we just have to, you know, account for the no's or like the ghostings and then just take who'll say yes. And it turns out, like, for the most part, everybody that we've asked has said yes, you know?
Yeah, we actually kind of had an embarrassment of riches because then it was like, oh, shoot. And they all like want to appear in the next week or two.
Yeah. We had like these couple of weeks where it was like we were talking to each other every day, but not just to each other. We're like with the guests.
Yeah, right. It's another side of our conversation that I really enjoy. I enjoy hearing you be an interviewer and a listener to these other individuals. And I like that we're able to like still have our voice while sort of highlighting the person who's our guest. I think these are all skills that, you know, I'm going to continue to work on. And I'm really happy that, you know, I've gotten to talk to like my idols, Gail Dines and Lundy Bancroft. Jane Ward has now like risen in my estimation even more. Reading her book was one thing, but talking with her is another. She's just a delight.
Yeah. And I think that it's, you know, we're going to keep improving. I can definitely sense an improvement from our first interview to now. And just generally hosting the podcast. I mean, the more you do this, the better you just get at it, like you do with anything. It's the 10,000 hours thing. You know, we've been doing this a while. It's just going to get better. But, you know, before we get into today's episode, I do want to tell our listeners, you know, if you've been liking what we've been doing, please, as usual, subscribe to us on Patreon. You know, we could always use the support. We have so many dreams and visions for this podcast and for FDS in general, and we can't do that without you. So definitely support us on Patreon. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Reddit. Follow us on, what else are we on? X. I think that's all for now. For now, that's all.
For now, that's all. But Diana and I have some ideas for episodes where we actually are going to solicit for our listeners to send in examples of scrotes or of, you know, wonderful men or of scenarios that are just plain confusing so that we can sort of have real-time responses, like sort of like an agony aunt kind of style session. Stay tuned for that, listeners. But also, like, what your feedback always matters to us. Yes, we want you to subscribe to Patreon. Do what you can to support us, even if it's like $5, buy us a coffee, is like they like to say. But I think more than anything, what I crave, and probably Diana too, is like, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your opinions. We want to hear your critiques. We want to hear your suggestions. Like, I don't want to be alone in an echo chamber. I'm doing this in conversation with y'all, which is really my ultimate goals.
We're in a dialogue with you, and we want to hear your stories, and we want to hear what you have to say about what we do. Any topics we could talk about that you think we haven't covered already, guests that you'd like to see us interview, because we're always looking for those. And yeah, I mean, you could reach out to us through all of those social media handles. I think on Instagram, it's _ the Female Dating Strategy. And I think on Twitter, it's femdatstrat. So yeah, reach out to us there, and you can get directly in touch with us now. So that's great. We see everything. I share everything with Rose. And Scroats, this is not for you. Leave us alone.
Exactly. So Mother's Day. We thought we'd talk about Mother's Day. Actually, you know what? Just goes to show my ignorance. I was like, Diana, do they have Mother's Day over where you live? And she's like, I think it's an international thing.
Well, I mean, you know what? I didn't know that either, so I wouldn't call it ignorance. I saw that I was getting advertising for it here. Not like, my impression was that Mother's Day, Father's Day, all these days are like different in different countries. But I think the Mother's Day one is universal, because I got the advertising for that too.
Oh, okay. So how do you celebrate Mother's Day in your area?
Well, I did. My mom was out of town on Mother's Day. So I was like, okay, Mother's Day, she just wanted me left alone, and that's fine. If I was a mom, I would have probably pulled the same move. So like, when I found out it was Mother's Day, which I think was the 11th of May, she was like not in town. And I was like, okay, well, I guess Mother's Day is I just leave you alone, But I'll take her out to a nice dinner, or like I'll call takeout. My mom loves to cook, but I'm like, why don't you take a break or something, like take a day off. I'll order in, or we'll go out, or I'll get a cake or something. She loves a sweet treat. My mom is a sweet treat lady. That's why I have to be so careful, because I used to get her cakes and stuff, but now I'm like, I literally feel like our roles have reversed, where now I feel like she's like the angsty teenager and I'm like the strict mommy. And so I have to like slap the sweets out of her hands, because she's always with a sweet treat. She's always got a sweet treat. Like, it's like crazy to me, and she's in perfect health, but still, it's like, why tempt the gods? Why test fate?
This is actually something we didn't bring up in the pre-talk, but this is a very good point. The fact that like there's a sort of fulcrum upon which the mother-child balance rests. And I think up and through 25, maybe 30, the mother is in the mothering position, but then it slowly tilts the other way. I remember by the end of my mom's life, it's like, I'm tucking her into bed. I'm helping her bathe. I'm the one cooking her favorite foods, right? Or I'm the one who's like, okay, that's enough guests for today. Like, we're going to let mom have a nap now. And I just remember I was so tickled, sad, but tickled about the fact that really the whole cycle of life ends up cycling around, where if you're lucky, if you're fortunate, and you've got this kind of relationship with your mother, you get to mother her. And that's a really special kind of love.
Yeah. I can't say I enjoy it very much, though. I'm not cut out to be a mommy figure. I've realized that from looking after my mom. I'm like, I was like, if I had you as a kid, I don't know. I think I would have seriously reconsidered parenting as a whole, because you just don't listen. and it's wild, because I think she probably said the same thing about me as a teenager, but she's the same. I'm like, I got it from you. Like, you don't listen either, She goes off without her phone, and then she goes off in the sun, and she doesn't wear sunscreen. And then she gets a headache from being out in the sun too long. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I have to help you with these common sense things. Why are you making me do this?
This is so adorable. It's so cute to hear. And yeah, it's not always enjoyable. That's for darn sure. It was like, I didn't like kicking out my mom's visitors, but like, hello, it's just common sense has to prevail, Diana, as you know. Like, we're always over here cheering on common sense and trying to embody it. So that's something that it often gets underlooked. With Mother's Day, actually, I'd had to go to a shipping store like UPS to drop something off for a friend, and it was absolutely packed. And I was like, I almost thought I should come in tomorrow, and good friends with the people who work there. And the manager was like, oh, no. She's like, tomorrow it's going to be an absolute disaster. It's going to be a zoo of everybody trying to mail everything to their mother the day before Mother's Day. And we all know like mail doesn't really go anywhere on Sundays, right? So I'm just like, how dare people? It's not like there isn't advertising, but like, you can't even get your gift out to your mother like a couple days in advance. I mean, okay, can I have a public health and safety announcement here for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is something my mom taught me, and I'm so glad she did. You have to send things so that they get there ahead of time or on time. You don't want to get your birthday card 2 weeks after the fact. You're still happy to get it, but it doesn't have the same sense of effort and consideration that it does if you actually like get it the day before or the day of. And so if you struggle with this, my friends, because everybody loves getting a card in the mail or a gift in the mail, you cannot convince me that people are like over that. No. So what I do is I have, for all my people whose birthdays I save in my phone, I put on the calendar a reminder about their birthday a week ahead of time. And then 5 days ahead of time, so that if I forget the first one, by the second one, I'm like, okay, I still have time to like write a little card, get a little gift, get over to the USPS, because I prefer to use USPS if I can while it's still here. And I never ever fail to hear from people who are like, I'm so I got your card on time. Thank you so much. It really means a lot to people because like in this day and age where everything is like instant gratification, like door dashing and, like you could streaming, all of this stuff that you can get like in immediate real time. There's something to be said for like the fact that mail is always going to take a couple days to get anywhere. And if you actually have the wherewithal to like time it so that it gets there on time or ahead of time, it's a level of effort that people just tend to be really touched by. So I encourage all people to start to really work on that in your own lives because it really makes your loved ones feel especially loved.
Yes, make the effort. And also, if you live internationally, add time for that. Like sometimes it can take up to a month. So if your mom doesn't live in the same country as you, make sure you get to that earlier than you normally would.
Exactly.
But that being said, we understand that this is a really polarizing holiday for most people. Like my mom, for example, is not a big birthday person. She's not a big like holiday celebration person. She's very into her like festivals, her religious festivals, and that's about it. And even then it's really very much about God. It's not about like this is time for family. It's like God must be worshipped and bye-bye. And so my mom grew up really poor, and I think that informed the way that she looks at festivities in general. It's not really a big focus in her life. I think for me, it's the polar opposite. Like, I'm all about the festivities, I'm all about doing fun things. But we have also a really like tenuous sort of relationship because we both are really strong, like spirits, and we're also really independent. So it's like a lot of the stuff we're not used to being in each other's space so much. So for me, it's like I've had to learn how to navigate sharing my space with someone in the same way that she has, and she has a lot more time, like she's just got a lot more time to do things now. So she wants to spend her time doing things that she likes because she spent so much of her life doing things she had to. And I think a lot of mothers probably can relate to that if they were from older generations, where it's like a lot of the stuff they had to do was because they had to do it, not because they necessarily wanted to do it. So I also encourage people to not take it too personally if your mom wants a day off, because chances are that's not usually something she gets.
That's a very good point. Actually, with your mother, it doesn't surprise me that you have an amazing mother who's like strong and independent. Do you feel like your dad was sort of like the fulcrum upon which your relationship balanced? Do you feel like he kind of helped, ease the waters among you all?
I mean, my dad was a softie. I think he was the one who was very like nurturing and very like, I want to do things and I want to celebrate and I want to buy a cake for no reason at all. And, just like very joyful. And my mom, I mean, also it's a result of their upbringings, I think, because my dad grew up without a lack. You know what I mean? He grew up in a fairly stable family life and had the ability to have finances. He started earning really young. And so he didn't really think of money in that way. I think my mom grew up in a house with a lot of scarcity. And so it impacted the way that she raised me. And so my mom always had a much more disciplined, stoic sort of persona. And my dad was always the goofball.
Interesting that like maybe it takes abundance for somebody to actually be able to have that sort of tenderness, but not necessarily, but that's an interesting food for thought. Do you actually know what relationship your mother had with her mother?
Oh, I mean, you know what? They loved her, but I think my grandmother was really strict. I mean, she kind of lost all of that by the time I came around because I was like untamable, but my grandmother was really strict with her children because my grandmother was a single mother. Like she had to raise all four of her kids on her own. So she lost her husband really young. And so she had to raise the kids on her own at a time when I don't think most women are even really allowed to have jobs. So she really struggled to put food on the table. And so for them, they kind of grew up without much. And so I think in general, her mindset is very like, don't waste money and squander it on like meaningless things. Like you need to save it for a rainy day. And I do think that financially that helped her stay really stable. But I do think that she's like a person who really does not know how to like celebrate and enjoy herself in that way. Like that doesn't come to her naturally. I think to my dad, it came a lot more naturally. So I think sometimes we have to think about like what we can do to improve our mother's conditions in terms of like, if your mom is not the type of person to identify between when to respect her wishes in terms of like she wants to be left alone and doesn't want to do anything, versus when it's like she's so used to living such a severe lifestyle that you have to let her lighten up a little bit and do something fun for her, you know? I think we all have the best intentions, and like the fine line is to what extent should we enforce our agenda on that person? You know what I mean?
Yes, that's such a good question. So my mother, I think I mentioned this before, Diana, right? That she was a nun before she obviously left the nunnery and married my father. And she also came from a very like a German farming family.
I don't know why I'm picturing The Sound of Music. Like you're one of the Von Trapp children.
Yes, basically. And she was the eldest girl. And so she was really the second mother to all of these children. And, you know, I call it the little house on the prairie upbringing because, like, we baked our own bread, we made our own jams, we had our own gardens. Like, we would get our meats from our neighbors who were the farmers who had, you know, either cattle or pigs. Like, everything was local, like hyper local, right? We very rarely got anything that came in a can that we didn't can. And so my mom came from that, like where everything was accounted for. You wasted nothing. There was, you know, even for like the tripe, you would make a soup out of it. Like I remember one time I came home and she was making soup and I went to stir it to see like what it smelled like and a cow tongue bobbed up. And I was like, ah!
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. And so she was that style of like waste not, want not. In fact, one of her brothers, when I went to visit home for a funeral last year, he's like, oh, did your mother teach you how to hold a nickel so tight it turned into a dime? And I was like, oh my gosh, me that. My mom did teach me that. By the time I came around, you know, she had been a nun. She had had a very austere farm life. I never had a blanket that was bought for me. She made all of our quilts, all of our blankets, right? The only thing she didn't like sew were our sheets. At least she would buy our sheets. But other than that, you know, everything was from scratch. And I really appreciated it. And I appreciate it even more now, knowing like how much time and effort she put into it. And the quality was wonderful. But as I got older, I just noticed how like she denied herself everything. She only drank water. She only wore the clothes that she had bought, you know, 15 years ago, or the shorts she had sewed herself 20 years ago. I mean, you know, like she wouldn't even buy herself new shoes. And I remember being like, you know, she's so on the ball with making sure like we're always well fed, we're well shod, we're in any and all sports or activities we want. You know, for piano music was really expensive. She never hesitated to buy me whatever piano literature I wanted. And so as I got older, I started to realize like, you know what? If this woman is ever going to be cosseted and indulged, it's going to have to come from me. And at that point, my brother was still living at home with me. I was the youngest, so everybody left one by one. But I was like, hey, listen, brother, let's pool our money for Mother's Day and let's buy our mom some nice clothes. And he was like, oh, God, please, yes. He's like, I'll drive us. Let's go. He's like, I've hated her clothing all for so long. And I was like, well, hey, how about for every birthday and every Christmas, you and I put our money together and we'll just slowly start replacing her wardrobe and getting her nice things that were in her style. I wasn't buying her things that weren't to her liking. She loved what we got her. It's exactly what she would have bought if she would buy herself things, but she wouldn't. And so over the course of like 10 years, my brother and I literally like gave her a wardrobe. I would take her shoe shopping. I had to buy her new socks. In fact, when I moved home that last year to take care of her as she was dying of cancer, I was folding her socks and underwear and they all had holes in them. And I was like, no, this is unacceptable. I literally had to buy her new underwear and socks because otherwise she would have just kept wearing what she already had. And I think that's where the fine line of like, how do you honor her wishes? But also, like, a lot of mothers will never allow you to care for them. They think it always has to go one way. But I think if you have a loving relationship with your mother or one of like gratitude and healthiness, then it's okay to start to like what you might feel is overreaching or overstepping. It's okay to do that in service of caring for her.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, for what it's worth, I don't think she's much of an overreacher. I think that, you know, growing up with her mother, realizing that that level of overreach was something that she never really liked was something that she didn't really impose on me. Like, you know, when you grow up in a culture, if you come from any culture where marriage is like a really high priority, by the time you start hitting your mid 20s, people start asking. And so a lot of the pressure comes internally from your family to like succumb to that pressure of like find someone, get married at any cost. And I never really had that pressure. Like the priority for me was always educate yourself and get a good living out of it. Like make sure you're able to look after yourself. And I think that's directly come from, again, being raised by a single mom that had to do those things, you know, that had to be intelligent about money, that had to work, that didn't have the option because there was no other man there, you know? She could have gotten married again, but I don't think she wanted to do that. I mean, I don't really know much about biological grandfather. I can't speak to what kind of man he was or how helpful he was, but I mean, if he's anything like the men of his time, it's very likely that, she was still doing most of the housework and the child rearing, right? So, like, now also having to be a breadwinner, like, I think that, she didn't really have much time to give emotionally to her children. And I think that that does impact the way that your parents are. Like, these depression era people in general, like, they lived in a time where it was like, emotional bonding with your child was like something that only strange people did, I guess.
Yeah, it was you out in the fields together, right?
It's like, you must have time. you, you must have time.
Yeah, well, we're planting corn together. Well, and that's such a good point. My mom, actually, I had much older parents because my mom had been in the nunnery. And so she was 41 when I was born. And yes, I was the youngest of four, but like she didn't have my sister until she was 34. And this was back in the 70s, like this was pretty unusual. And so, as similar to you, Diana, I never had marriage modeled for me or brought up to me or encouraged to me. It was always just like, oh, you're a wonderful pianist. You should really pursue that. Oh, you're so good with books. Why don't you work on your education? What do you think you might want to be in your life? And, when I wanted to travel, she was like, oh, it's so wonderful. You're going to go to the most wonderful places. Just take care. But it was always like she wanted me to be a whole person in and of myself. That was her only goal for me. And I just think I've seen so many of my friends whose mothers are just obsessed with their kids getting married and having grandbabies. When are you going to give me my grandbabies? When am I going to be a grandma? And I just think, like, what a sad life it is that you can't just allow your child to grow up to be who they are.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. The older you get, you start realizing your parents are just people. I think my mom has a really funny sense of humor at times. Like, I've asked her questions through life, being like, well, there's some women who are like worried about their partners like cheating on them and stuff. Like, they marry a rich guy and he cheats on them. Like, what's stopping them from cheating on them, And she was like, well, clearly this is a skill issue because you should be spending all of his money. If you spend all of his money, he has no money for a mistress. And I was like, and I didn't expect that answer. She was like, this is a skill issue. Like, you should be spending all of it.
Your mom was FDS, pre FDS. Damn, Diana. No wonder this is your lineage.
I was laughing so hard because I didn't expect that answer from her. And she was like, this is a skills issue. Like, if you spend all of his money, he won't have money for a mistress. I was like, which was funny because that was a joke with my dad as well. He was like, between the two of you, you're so expensive. Like, anybody accusing me of infidelity is like, must have a really false understanding of my finances. He's like, both of you are incredibly expensive. I don't know what made you think that you're cheap. I was like,
and I bet he was proud. He was probably proud that he had such expensive ladies.
yeah, I mean, look, my father also grew up around a lot of women who were expensive ladies. Like, there was no cutting slack in his family in terms of like what the expectation was for men. Like, they had to work, They had to work at home too. Like, because it was like the division of labor in that household was dependent on the fact that there were just that many people and it wasn't feasible for one or two women to pick up the slack for many of them. Again, more to do with common sense and less to do with misogyny, right? And that's the thing. Like, I think a lot of families, misogyny is a core principle in their household. So it doesn't matter what religion they follow. It doesn't matter what their financial position is. It's even if it makes sense for less people to work, it's like the principle of the matter that the woman should work.
Yeah, I would argue that misogyny is the cult.
Yeah. Patriarchy is the religion, actually. In my father's family, it's not that they weren't patriarchal men. It's just that the expectation that the women would do everything was not something they could sustain because the women of my family protested hard. And the women of my family came of age when like South Asia was like, relieving itself of like colonialism. Like, they were leaving colonial structures behind. So like civil disobedience became like a national movement. And that extended to the household. It was like, if I don't want to do this, I'm just not going to do this. And then you're going to have to feed yourself anyway. So figure it out. So they just kind of knew that like they couldn't toe that line with them because they'd be like, well, we're just going to shut down and do nothing. We're going to play bingo and we're going to go play Ludo and we're going to play some board games and just not bother. And then you're going to have to wash your dishes and wash your clothes on your own. Like, civil disobedience helps. I think women think about like male weaponized incompetence, but I'm telling you, you can pull the same shit back on them. Like, anytime a man has asked me to cook, I always like, I think this was a trick from Sherry Argov's book, but I didn't even know that it was a trick because I used to do it all the time. I used to like blow up something or burn something in his household so he'd never ask me to do it again.
Yeah, where you like burn the rice. It's like, it's impossible to burn
the
rice.
rice, overcook the popcorn, undercook the chicken, like just,
Yes.
do it
Oh my
so
God.
that he never asks you to do that ever. I mean, I will say, I don't think that you should be doing this like now as a grown adult. Like, I will say that in order to avoid having to have direct conversations with people where now I would just be like, I'm not doing that. But back then I was like, I don't want to hurt his feelings by saying I'm not doing that. So I'm going to just be so bad at this that he just never asked me to do it again. I was already pulling men's tricks back on them. I was like,
I love that. And I think that's a good point. If you're somebody who has a problem saying no, or if you just like, are a chronic people pleaser, this is a really good alternate method of like voicing your displeasure without having to actually say it. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a very savvy technique, Diana. I'm glad you brought that up to us.
yep, going back to family structures for a second, I do think that, when I look at the family structure in my father's household where the women actually had each other's back and were able to unionize this way, I don't think this is the norm in most family structures. I think even amongst women, there's usually a hierarchy, and like mother in laws and like the head matriarch of the family expects the other women to fall in line and cater to and please the men in a certain kind of way. I don't think that coddling was allowed in general, which is why my father didn't grow up with that level. He would have been a very different man if that was allowed. You know what I mean? I think in most families, it's like the expectation that when the bride comes into the family, the mother in law is going to direct her and tell her, this is what you need to do in order to be like a sufficient wife for my darling son, the king of the house. And you need to learn all of his favorite recipes, and you need to cook things exactly the way that I like, that I cook it so that he feels satisfied. And so it's like there's this grooming of young women when they enter households to like cater to the men in a specific sort of way. And that makes women really resentful of older women. I don't think it's just as simple as like men encourage you to like look down on or have beef with older women. I do think that internally we also need to think about the ways in which our internal misogyny comes out to play, where we're like, oh, I expect her to treat my son in a specific kind of way.
Right. And to take my word as law.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I think this leads to one of the points we wanted to discuss, which is the wound of motherhood, the mother wound. And that's why this can be a really complicated holiday. I know that's why Father's Day is a very difficult one for me personally. But for a lot of women, they have had mothers who have been nightmares, or who have been absolutely neglectful, or who have been pick-me's and like have chronically brought unsuitable men into the household and like put their daughters in peril, or led to them being assaulted. I mean, there are so many ways in which mothers can let down their children. And that seems to be something that we don't like to acknowledge, let alone acknowledge like how deeply that wound actually runs for many people, let alone daughters.
And I think what ends up happening is that the ecosystem we live in is also very reluctant to scrutinize mothers. And so, if all of you have read this book, I really recommend this book. It's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Like Rose and I were talking about this in the pre chat, and we're like, this is one of the books that is definitely something you should read if you have any kind of parental wound. Mother, father, doesn't matter. Because it talks about this thing called healing fantasies. And healing fantasy is essentially this idea that, like, you can have this ideal relationship with your parent based on certain actions you do. For example, when you're a child, it's like, if I'm just a good student, maybe my mom will love me, maybe my parents won't get divorced. And then when you get older, it's like, I have the capacity to have this compassion. I have this privilege of an education that's allowed me to feel this level of compassion. And if I can continue talking and having a dialogue with my parent every single day, maybe I can wear them down. And it's very hard for people to accept this even in their romantic relationships. So I understand where it comes from, because it stems from your parental relationships as well. It's this idea that if they wanted to, they would, you know? And I think it's hurtful when you hear it from a parent, right? And it's like, this parent doesn't do that not because they're not capable. In some cases, they aren't capable. In some cases, that hasn't been modeled for them. But honestly, even in a situation where it was modeled for them, some of them just don't want to do it.
Yeah. Because of their own trauma and wounds, right? That's their own immaturity. And that's why this book is titled Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. I mean, that was one of the first ones that my therapist recommended to me. So I've been reading that on and off for over 10 years now. I mean, I own a physical copy. I bought the book.
And I think it's hard for people to accept it as well, because it's like, functionally, your parent might be someone who's on top of their game, really good at their career, really good at finances, has provided a stable sort of living for you. You have food on the table, your material needs are met, they paid for school, et cetera, et cetera. But emotionally, you just do not have that connection with that parent.
I would argue my other brother and sister, they both have children, but my brother has two boys. And his whole life he's worked hard to be like the provider and the masculine figure and, the voice of wisdom. But like, he never goes home. He just works. That's all he does. And like, it can be your birthday, it can be Christmas, and oh, something happened at the office, he has to go in. And I really don't think he's having an affair. I've been there before, like where he's just there alone on a Sunday. And it's just like, why are you having these kids? Well, that's what he thought he had to do. But he does not know how to be present for them emotionally. And I just think it's so sad, because his boys are such wonderful boys. and they don't even know what they're missing, right? They think their dad is wonderful. And to them, he is. But what they'll come to learn as they get older is like, he was never really present in the ways that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that like that's the thing. We have set too much store by men just being financial providers without any expectation of them being emotional providers as well. It's like, oh, as long as the money is coming in, he's a great father. And for women, it's like the polar opposite, where it's like she needs to cut the crust off wrong one day for her to be a bad mom.
Yes.
She
Yes.
forgot the peanut butter. She forgot that he prefers creamy and not crunchy, and now she's the worst mom in the world, right? And so I'm not saying to cut slack for women and for mothers if you've been affected by a terrible mother. Like, I really want to be very clear that, you know your relationship and how you feel best. That's why I think it's a good idea to read that book just to assess whether you have these healing fantasies. Because I think a lot of people are trapped in, again, cycles of emotional abuse because they keep relying on this healing fantasy of like, if I just keep talking it out, if I communicate, it will solve everything. Which is why a big part of FDS is also like, you can't communicate people out of their traumas. You can't communicate sense into them if they don't want to receive sense. You can't have an equal conversation with the person who's not trying to be a recipient of that conversation.
Oof. It's so hard. It's so hard to accept and come to terms with that. Ask me how I know. But it's true that once you accept it and start to really integrate that, what I tell you, like the level of improvement that your life comes to is unreal. I just look back over, it took me a really long time to start to accept that. It took me even longer to actually start to put boundaries in my life with people who were just not going to be able to care or care for me in ways that I needed and that were reasonable. And since I actually started to just deal with that wound and accept that, like seeing them and being a part of their lives and continuing to try was just reopening that wound again and again and again. Since I've stopped, the amount of improvement in my life has been immeasurable.
Yep. And I think it's a big part of understanding that you need to reparent yourself and reprogram yourself in order to get to that position of clarity where you understand that this person is flawed. It's harder with parents than it is with partners because you can't really choose your parent. So you might have a vision of your family life that's not actually the reality of what you have with this parent. And it's very easy to get caught up into this idea of like, if I just keep talking it out with them, they'll understand someday. And poor them, and they lived through World War II or Vietnam or whatever they've lived through, if they've, especially if they're veterans or if they've been through like extreme trauma, poverty, like lots of war, any sort of thing that like really affects a person mentally. And then say they have the capacity to just have a regular, normal relationship with me, because it is that much harder for them. And you can have empathy for a person while also maintaining empathy for yourself and being like, I feel bad that my mom went through X, like she went through poverty, but that doesn't excuse her inability to celebrate me. That doesn't excuse her ability to not care about me, right? Because you would also think that with abundance, as a person grows through life and they go from a position of scarcity to a position of abundance, that they would naturally want to bestow that abundance on their offspring. Like, I think also generationally, between the boomers and like the generations that came after them, we're kind of shell shocked by this understanding that they might be the first generation that truly doesn't want better for their kids. I think it's really hard for a lot of people to accept because we were all told this at a really young age that, like, oh, parents just want the best for their kids. We're kind of seeing generationally that, like, that might not be true of boomers.
Yeah, like, maybe not, maybe not.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's so sad. It's really so sad. It's like such a brief period of prosperity, and they're like, okay, I got mine, we're good. Peace out. But like, let's deal with the facts as they stand, right? And I think this is a really good point where, the idea that you want to have empathy and understanding for your parent while also reparenting yourself. That was a big one with my therapist as well, was like learning how to parent the child inside that had never received the care and the tenderness that she required in order to really grow and flourish. And since I've been like, oh, little baby Rose, you little cutie pie, like, obviously that's not all I do, but like, I have a few pictures of myself up from when I was a small child. And I try to touch base at least a time or two every week to look at that and just be like, you did so well. Like, you were such a good little girl. You were such a little sweetheart. It's okay that you were hurting. It's okay that you didn't get, your big sister that you wanted. Like, what would you say to your child if you had your own child? That's what I've had to do with myself. And it really has made such a huge difference. But this is something that when we were talking about this in the pre-show, we were like, okay, this is a big wound. Let's acknowledge it. And at the same time, we're like, but why is it so taboo to criticize mothers? Why? We think it's due to patriarchy, right, Diana?
Yeah, I mean, there's this false promise of motherhood, and it's the only thing that society really rewards. And if you take away the reward of motherhood, why would most people do it? So I think this is one of the situations in which even patriarchy is very critical of like people who try to criticize motherhood because they recognize that that's the last thing that they have that they can sell to women that's not romance, you know? The joy and the fulfillment of motherhood. So if women didn't find a sense of joy and fulfillment from motherhood, that takes away every last chip that men have to keep us in this position. You know? Again, a lot of people look into, well, my parent grew up with scarcity and that's why they're terrible to me now. But there's also people who've grown up in abundance who are the same way. So it's really important to acknowledge that it's not really about the amount of resources they had, it's about their attitude to those resources in general and whether they see it as a place from which they can grow or a place that they're trapped by. And this is the thing about like a lot of men, right? A lot of men will be like, I justify my abuse of other women because I was abused. I meet more men like this that look at their own family setup and look at their father wounds and they're like, well, my dad was an absent alcoholic. And so I justify my abuse of women because I grew up in terrible circumstances. And so they need to be the emotional punching bag for my childhood, right? But at the same time, I think about, the men in my father's generation, my father included, who were orphaned really young and didn't wind up becoming like that, didn't wind up being embittered by their position in life and by not having the same amount of resources or parents or whatever it is that other people had. Because they saw what they lacked and they were like, I don't want my kid to go without something like that. So I'm going to make sure that I give them the best. And I think, again, it comes down to an attitude. It comes down to how much does he identify with his victimhood? I don't really keep this just to men because I've had this vetting strategy with friends as well, where I'm like, I'm very suspicious of people who over identify with their victimhood.
Absolutely. For me, it's in my number one red flag, men or women.
Yeah. I've had some bad friends who are like, I'm just a victim.
If you end up with that friend, like it's only going to be downhill from there. Like when you meet them is the best it will ever be, and it only gets worse from there. That my sister has the chronic victimhood martyr complex, and it's just like there's no point having any conversation because she always has to bring it back to how she's been wronged. And it's like, I get it. Listen, I grew up in the same family as you. I'm well aware of the wrongs that we've experienced, right? But like at a certain point, you have to have the temperament that's like, okay, well, onwards and upwards. Or if not, like, I'm going to leave you behind because I can't continue to be weighted down by like these years of victimhood that you refuse to relinquish. And I get it. I really get it that it's so hard when you come from like deep trauma or abuse, or neglect, which is its own pernicious thing. But like at a certain point, you have to kind of decide what kind of temperament you want to have in this life. And mine was like, I'm going to believe in abundance. I'm going to believe in like that the universe is operating according to my greatest good. I'm going to believe that wonderful things are coming my way. And guess what, Diana? All of this has come to be true. All of this is, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, in a way, you sort of like what you permit is what you promote. So for me, the fact that I no longer permit these like constant victims in my life means that I've now promoted, like resilience and positivity and optimism. That's what comes into my life now. And that's what I need.
I think it's another reason why there's a taboo to criticize mothers with that, though. And it's because whether they want to admit it or not, I think that a lot of people see mothers as the victims of society. And they are, in the sense that they're not really nurtured or helped in any meaningful way. Like, clearly, despite the fact that patriarchy relies on mothers to create the next generation of workers, they don't really value them as the source of all of that. They don't really make it easier. And that's why you have like this birth rate crisis right now everywhere, where it's like, oh my God, it's such a terrible thing that women aren't just letting men, jizz in them. Like, yeah, well, why should we give up our lives for men who are absent? Because we've seen what it looks like from previous generations. We're not unaware. Like a lot of these men will, extol the virtues of this kind of sacrifice that their mothers made. Like I've been on dates with men where they're like, oh my God, my mother, she sacrificed everything for me. She did everything for me. And it's like always a red flag because that's exactly what he expects from you because he sees nothing wrong in her suffering. He thinks that there's some virtue in her suffering. And so like a lot of them, they view mothers as the victims of society. And so it becomes taboo to criticize them because they like them in that position. If they genuinely didn't want them to be victims, they would actually help them. They'd be present parents. They would be a present government. They would do something about it to ease their pains. They like that position of victimhood.
Yeah, because it's in service to them, which is what they've been taught to. Yeah, exactly. And I think this is the other thing. It's like it's a double bind of being a mother because it's held up as like the ultimate womanly ideal. And yet it's also used to punish and corral and imprison women. So patriarchy wants to be able to like decide whether they want to reward it or punish it, but it's never going to be your choice which one you get. It's just going to be the luck of the draw. And like, who wants to play that lottery if those are your options?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why patriarchy also has like this hatred for single women. But if you really think about it, most mothers are single women.
Oh, yeah, we call them married single mothers.
Yeah, married single mothers. They're all single moms. The reason you don't like single moms is because they chose that for themselves, as opposed to the woman who's still stuck with a man that's useless to her, you know?
Well, actually, the brother I was talking about who's always at work, who like on Christmas will disappear, I consider his wife a married single mother. She does everything, and she's a wonderful woman. He married a woman who was basically, he married the woman who was our mother. And that's exactly what our mother did. And that's what he wanted for his life. And he found it. I have a lot of empathy for her. But, at the same time, it's like, well, when you make these choices when you're a certain age and then you see the results, like you have to decide what you're willing to permit, And if you want to be married to a man who's just never there, that's your choice too, but that's not the one I'm going to make.
No. I also think it's because of the superficiality of the reward of being a mother and being a married woman. Like they're okay with the reward that comes from being a married mother.
Yes, I think she really is.
And they're willing to give up their own independence and their own respect, their self respect for that.
At first, I tried to be much closer to her, but over time, I realized like she really just wants to be a mother, like in her own world, and really isn't interested beyond like the walls of her home, what's going on. And that's something that's never going to be me. So that is something I want to bring up though before I know we're coming to a close, but I think something that I have to bring up before we wrap it up is that, being a mother is always a chancy proposition. It's always been used as a cudgel for women and their choices throughout millennia. But not only have we had to deal with patriarchy, right now we're dealing with fascism. We are dealing with scary political times. And I think, that's another reason why women are really kind of hesitant now. It's not just the quality of the men that we have to deal with and their lack as potential fathers and partners, but like when you're dealing with men who would rather take away your vote or force you from your job and all financial independence, like how are you supposed to bring a child into that kind of world? I wouldn't. I won't.
And you have to remember that those ties are permanent. You can get rid of a man, you can't get rid of a child. And the child ties you to the man forever. It's really strange how, a lot of men will be like, oh, yeah, I had a child with this woman, but I refused to marry her. And it's like, a child is a lot more, if you're actually participating, a child is a lot more work than marriage.
And I think, who did I read? It was an older woman, Julia Fox.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just wish I had known how important choosing the father of my child was. Why wasn't I ever taught that this was going to be a decision that had ramifications for my entire life? She's like, I just wish I had really known that and thought so much more carefully about who was going to be the father of my child. And I was like, ooh.
Oh my God, totally. Who you marry and who you divorce, like this is why I think like Sex and the City is such an interesting show because of like the way that Charlotte's divorce went by. Like she still had a partner that was willing to set her up for life after they ended their relationship. And I think that that's where the mutual respect part comes in. Like I just saw this interview with Dave Portnoy, the guy who I think he runs Barstool Sports, like he owns it, right? And I mean, look, I have nothing to say about him as a person. I know nothing about him, right? And I don't think very highly of Barstool Sports because they've done a lot of crazy, fucked up shit. But I was just listening to this interview about how his ex-wife has access to his bank account and she can like take whatever amount of money that she wants from it, right? Like she can do whatever the fuck she wants with it. He pays for like everything for her even now. And he said that, she has a boyfriend currently. And like the interviewer asked her, he was like, well, if she decides to marry her boyfriend, like, and she uses that money, and he was like, she could drain everything in that account and I wouldn't know. And he's like, well, why would you allow that? Right. And he was like, well, because she was there with me when I had nothing. And the only reason I have anything at all right now is because she helped me with that. So like, I'm loyal to a fault. Like I trust her. She is my friend. We didn't work out as a relationship, but she is my friend. And so because she set me up, I'm okay with helping her out for the rest of her life. So if that's what she wants me to help her pay for this wedding to this guy, then I'm in full support of that. And I just thought, oh, okay, I don't know anything else about this guy, so I can't, verify whether he's a decent man or not. But just on that action alone, I'm like, okay, this is what we should want in the end of a relationship, right? We want someone who mutually respects us, who's like, I don't know if she's the mother of his children, I don't know if he has any kids, but he doesn't look at her with this like, I got mine, this is mine, that is yours kind of mindset. Like they should want to set you up in a way that looks after you in your old age. Like my father always had an inkling that he wasn't going to be here like to the end of, a normal life, like 80, 90, etc. And so he always set it up for me and my mom to continue being expensive ladies because he was like, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen to the next guy if there is a next guy. So I might as well set you up. He's like, the poor next guy is going to have to deal with your expenses. I might as well set you up for life, you know? And so he saw that as his responsibility and nobody else's responsibility. And I think that you would do well to pick a partner that does think about longevity. In sickness and in health, these kinds of vows that we make to each other, they mean something. I think part of the reason I don't want to get married to just about anybody is because I actually do believe that there is something sacred in doing that. I do believe that there is some value in doing that. And I think that a lot of us would do well to consider something sacred. I know we joke around a lot on this podcast, and we should. We should definitely joke. But I think that when it comes to making choices like who's going to be the father of my kid, who am I going to get married to, who am I co parenting this child with if it doesn't work out? Like, that person needs to have been a stellar person, treating you well throughout, even if it didn't end well for whatever reason. We have no control over like the longevity of a relationship, but you should hope that even if it does end, it ends with mutual respect, and that you can count on that person and vouch for that person to show up as a partner when you have children, especially if there's children involved. And if that's what you're setting up yourself for, where you're like, I have this absent husband who doesn't really help me right now, that's what you should expect when you divorce him.
Diana, such words of wisdom, such words of wisdom. I think we keep talking at length about this, but I'm glad we use this as an opportunity, just as sort of a touchstone to remind women that, as we're pursuing dating and we're pursuing romance and love, if that's what we're doing, have the ability to recognize and discern what sort of nurturing abilities your partner is going to have. Because ultimately, it will have reverberations long after they're gone, whether it was in sickness or in health or not. So with that, I think we got to wrap it up, Diana. I love having this conversation with you. To the women who are mothers, happy Mother's Day. I hope you felt cherished and treasured. I hope you feel proud of the struggles and the sacrifices and the victories you've made. And to all the scrotes who are absolutely worthless in this regard, die fucking mad.
Die mad.
See you next week.